Last month, a long and painful saga played out in the bloody killing fields of the Balkans had a happy ending in the tranquil grounds of Government House, Canberra. The Governor-General, Sir William Deane, threw a welcome party for Branko Jelen, the Serbian care worker jailed for espionage, who'd finally been released and allowed to emigrate to Australia.
First of all, can I say welcome to you all on this very happy occasion. In particular, can I say welcome to Branko.
Rarely has a new arrival been so celebrated, but Jelen was always a special case, someone caught up in a dangerous game beyond his control, who, in all conscience, could never have been left to rot in a Belgrade prison. He was, after all, merely a junior partner to the two Australians arrested with him, Steve Pratt and Peter Wallace. And all along, CARE had been anxious to send a clear message to its local staff throughout the world that in times of trouble they wouldn't be abandoned.
Our international humanitarian organisations do wonderful work, and in one sense they're part of the face of Australia to the rest of the world.
The nation's welcome was heartfelt, yet there's more to this story than we've ever been told before. For tonight, SBS can reveal how these men were compromised by their own organisation when it did a deal that had nothing to do with humanitarian work and everything to do with intelligence. CARE Canada, part of the CARE Federation, had a contract with the Government of Canada, a NATO member, to recruit a team of people, many of them former military men, to help monitor events in Kosovo. While Pratt, Wallace and Jelen weren't part of the operation, Pratt, as CARE's country director in the former Yugoslavia, did have a role in setting it up. It compromised not just him and his co-defendants, but CARE's entire effort in the Balkans. You're clearly annoyed, even angry, that you were even exposed to this particular incident.
Oh, I think it was unfortunate. I wished it hadn't happened.
CARE Australia's chairman, Malcolm Fraser.
A humanitarian organisation in an emergency area, as the Balkans plainly was, should not also be involved in monitoring. Now that's very clear, it's a plain view, and CARE Canada has taken a different view.
Within the international aid community, the implications of the deal are still sinking in. But already some are accusing CARE of recklessness, of casting all aid workers under suspicion and jeopardising their ability to provide help where and when it's most needed. Are you shocked to hear of this?
Yeah, I am. I'm very surprised that, that they would engage in such a blatantly ambiguous position as humanitarian aid workers.
Fiona Terry is Australian president of the Nobel Prize-winning French organisation Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. Do you think that most people in the aid community would be shocked by this?
Yes, I think most would be shocked and disappointed by it, yeah.
One agency said to us they were horrified by this. Another said CARE had been incredibly stupid. Do you think it's put other aid workers at risk by drawing the suspicion that people supposedly engaged in humanitarian work may be pursuing other agendas?
I don't think so, no, I really don't.
Well, I do think that there may be bad repercussions, and yes, it could compromise very much our ability to work in conflict areas, yeah.
When Malcolm Fraser was on his epic mission last year to secure the release of his men, he was anxious to keep the contract secret. Even now, he doesn't know if the Serbs ever knew. But with Pratt, Wallace and now Jelen free, the story can be told. When SBS put a Canada connection to you last year, you asked us not to mention this. Were you concerned that it would complicate your efforts to gain the release of these people?
Of course. It was a question of perception, not a question of reality. I didn't know what anyone knew. I didn't know what was going to be introduced into the court. And if you've got, you know, a state of war, a state of siege, Serbs against the world, what could people make of something, however innocent?
When I came to Yugoslavia,
Kada sam došao u
I
Jugoslaviju,
performed some intelligence tasks
obavljao sam određene obaveštene zadatke u ovoj zemlji.
by using the cover of Care Australia.
When Steve Pratt made his celebrated confession last year, we were told it was under duress. He wasn't a spy at all, just an ordinary aid worker caught up in events beyond his control. Malcolm Fraser still believes none of the three was engaged in espionage.
Damage justice essential by these actions, for which I'm grateful. Sorry.
Our people were innocent, I believe, absolutely. I'll be blanco shell, innocent, absolutely.
Yet what the former Prime Minister now readily admits is that CARE was guilty of a serious error of judgment in allowing the Canadian contract to ever happen.
CARE Australia was the lead organisation in Serbia, correct?
Yes.
Did you know at the time about the CARE Canada contract?
No, I didn't know until after our people were arrested.
Right, so
And
did
I
anybody in CARE Australia know?
Yes, but you'd have to take that up with Charles Tapp as National Director. I didn't know. I believed I should have known. And if I had known, I think that the program might have been ended.
This is the man Fraser says could and should have prevented the deal. Charles Tapp, CARE Australia's National Director, is getting a very public caning from his chairman.
Was there any way that, as the lead country in Serbia, you could have stopped that particular program?
Technically, yes. It would have been perhaps unconventional within CARE philosophy, but it could have been stopped.
By whom?
It could have been stopped. Well, Steve Pratt, we know, was opposed to it. But CARE in Australia would also have had to been opposed to it. You'd have to take it up with Charles Tapp as to why it was not stopped.
Did Pratt tell Tapp about this?
I'm sure the National Director knew about the program, yes.
Should Tapp have told you, do you think?
Well, let's just say that we've all learnt from some aspects of this program.
You wish you...
It's no surprise that Fraser's comments have sparked a major row within CARE itself. What you're about to see is extraordinary proof of the deep divisions this deal has generated. My interview with Fraser last Friday interrupted in mid-flow by CARE's publicity manager Anthony Fennell.
Let's put it this way, with the wisdom of hindsight, my view, CARE Australia's view, is that a monitoring operation should not be attached in any way to a humanitarian operation.
Right.
And Steve didn't have anything to do with setting up administrative stuff. And also, Graham, it's not a... It's a
Look, you're interrupting the interview.
It's a contract that CARE
Come
Canada
on.
has with CEDA, not with the Government of Canada.
Fennell wanted Fraser to make a distinction. The CARE contract was with the Canadian government's foreign aid agency, CEDA. It's a distinction Fraser rejects, forcefully.
Anthony, when I'm doing an interview, you don't interrupt.
Look, let's
have you
continue.
got this on the...
It's just an important distinction that it's not a contract with the Government of Canada, it's a contract with CEDA.
Anthony?
Right, CEDA is an agency of the Canadian government. I would like to continue the interview. Can we do
I
that?
was just making a point of clarification.
Well, you do not interrupt an interview when I'm being interviewed. Do you understand that?
I was making a point of clarification.
Anthony, can you understand?
I won't
Can you understand plain
make any
English?
I won't make any more...
Do not interrupt when I'm being interviewed, and do not ever interrupt again. Do you understand?
I don't think this is a good thing to be saying.
I don't think it was a good thing for you to interrupt.
All right, look, let's...
But I take it that the cameras are not
Yeah.
recording any part of
Yeah, let's...
Anthony's interruption. Is that right?
Well, I mean, obviously the interview was interrupted. I mean, we'd have to say that it was interrupted. But, you know, this is,
Well, say that it's
this is highly irregular.
I know it's highly irregular.
To Fraser, CEDA and the Canadian government are one and the same.
The Canadian government, through its agent CEDA, was funding an operation. I'd thought CEDA was purely a humanitarian organisation, and then I discovered that CEDA had a non-humanitarian funding window.
And through this window passed Canada's contract with CARE to hire monitors for Kosovo, a humanitarian organisation willingly drawn into a compromising non-humanitarian mission.
Well, the program was designed to help keep the peace, designed to help stop incidents in which people got murdered or beaten up or killed. The program itself was a good program. It was an honourable program. No element of, it was all on top of the table.
But this was an error of judgment.
The error of judgment was attaching a different kind of good program to a humanitarian organisation.
At the time the contract was signed at the end of 1998, the international community was trying to stop the appalling violence in Kosovo. With Serbia's agreement, a monitoring force was assembled by the OSCE, the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, from among its 55 member states stretching from Vancouver to Vladivostok. In Ottawa, CEDA's Director of Balkan Projects, Stephen Wallace, turned to CARE.
We had an agreement with CARE Canada whereby they identified candidates who were suitably qualified under those various skill sets asked for by the OSCE, and once the OSCE selected and deployed these individuals, CARE Canada could provide for basic administrative support, things like medical reviews, orientation briefing sessions, and the payment of per diems and so on.
This is the man who signed for CARE, Dr. John Watson, CARE Canada's Executive Director.
You're looking for people, if at all possible, who had previous experience in conflict zones, plus a flexible personality, who've dealt with trauma before, and who want to go into work of this type. Usually they're on a network. There is an organization tasked with maintaining a kind of a permanent roster of interested people. So they would forward us CVs. Some people would call direct. A lot of people would be referred to us by, you know, they'd call up the government looking for this type of work and would be referred to CARE Canada.
Consistent with any kind of international operation, be it in humanitarian assistance or be it in development assistance or in peace monitoring, you'll find that you'll have some of the skill sets come from ex-military people, and this was no exception here.
No one can say for sure whether some of the recruits may have been real spies also working for Western intelligence, though it's entirely reasonable to assume so, given the circumstances in Kosovo. CARE defends itself by saying the Serbs were meant to be given copies of any OSCE report. But a senior source inside the OSCE has told Dateline no information of any value was in fact passed on. The same source says the OSCE and NATO were working hand in hand, with OSCE reports going direct to NATO. That's no news to Serbia, according to Deputy Information Minister Miodrag Popovic.
We knew all along their intelligence activities. We knew all along about the real purpose of OSCE mission, and that was to justify later NATO aggression.
And so CARE Canada not only had a contract with one of the belligerents whose planes would soon be bombing Belgrade, it had a direct role in sustaining the Canadian members of a force passing information directly to Serbia's enemies.
They were paid by the Government of Canada, operating through CARE Canada, who provided the administrative support.
Stripped to its bare essentials, what CARE Canada did was to help set up an intelligence network inside Kosovo. That's true, isn't it?
No, using the word intelligence immediately gives the wrong impression. It was a monitoring program. Let me backtrack half a sentence. Intelligence implies that other elements are involved, maybe espionage or whatever, because intelligence and espionage go hand in hand.
Right, well,
Now,
the Oxford Dictionary meaning of intelligence is information that might be of value militarily. And isn't this what we're talking about?
That's one of the meanings of intelligence.
When we had so many ex-military and so many ex-policemen going in under this Care Canada contract, did not that give rise to a suspicion that that may have been avoided had that contract never been signed?
Oh, look, in retrospect, in hindsight, I think it's much better if it hadn't been signed, if it hadn't taken place.
So it was a mistake?
I've said that my view is that these kinds of operations should not be mixed up with the humanitarian operation. That is Australia's view, very clearly, quite categorically, and we would be saying to our country directors in an emergency, if anyone comes at you for a program of this kind, we're not going to be part of it.
But Care Australia's country director in Serbia, Steve Pratt, didn't say no. He actually helped the Canadians set up their operation, assisting a staff member whose job was to liaise with the monitors. Fraser tells us he didn't like doing so, though Care Canada's boss, John Watson, has a different recollection of events.
I travelled with Steve for a week in Kosovo. It was quite clear to us that on the traditional humanitarian side it was getting very difficult. I mean, we were blowing up more houses than we were able to repair. We didn't have landmine-proof vehicles, so even just getting out to the countryside became a major topic of discussion. You had to know where the landmines were and where the conflict was. So there was a definite advantage to having an effective peace monitoring program going on to CARE's traditional humanitarian work, and we decided the two could be quite separated, and therefore went ahead with it.
You say that the Serbs knew about the OSCE monitoring program, but did they know about Care Canada's contract with the Canadian government?
Well, let me put it this way. Serbia, the government of Yugoslavia, and for that matter, I imagine the government of Serbia, would have known that NATO countries generally were supplying monitors for the agreed KVM monitor program. So the fact that the monitors were supplied by a NATO member is not of any particular significance.
No, but did
No, I don't know whether they knew specifically that the Canadian government was involved. I don't know to what detail where the people came from, where the monitors came from, was reported to the government of Yugoslavia.
Belgrade, March 1999. For any Westerner still in the former Yugoslavia, life had become very difficult indeed. Even aid workers were suspect, in a climate in which the Serbs had claimed homing devices were being planted to help the NATO bombs reach their targets. Steve Pratt and Peter Wallace had been trying as best they could to keep CARE's local operations going, but at the end of March they set off with CARE's files and computers.
They had office records. They had some other personal material of Samira Pratt, who's a Muslim. I think they're both Muslims, actually. I learned afterwards that anyone who approached a certain border to move out of the country, as they were at the time, if they had a lot of written materials in the car, it was detained.
Right, you're talking about Croatia here.
Yeah, the Croatian border.
Yeah. I mean, people to this day can't understand why they didn't go out through Hungary, as most other people did, and chose to go out through Croatia. Do we have an answer to that?
The traffic was heavy. I think some bridges were down. It was going to take a long time. They thought it would be quicker. They'd been out through the other border, the Lipovic border, many times, hadn't had any trouble.
Pratt has apparently been telling people that that was the costliest mistake of his life. Would you agree with that assessment?
Well, I don't know his life in any sort of detail, but obviously it was a very difficult mistake.
What was in the CARE files, though, proved even more costly.
Why would Steve Pratt have needed to have gathered information on troop movements, on tank positions, on minefields, that sort of thing?
Well, moving fuel and food around, can you get your convoys through? Can we get our fuel through? Can we get our food through to the centres? Do we have to go a different way around? Is there fighting in the way? Are there troops in the way? I think that's all pretty normal. Now, look, there are a lot of lessons out of this incident. Steve had military training, so his situation reports were written in his traditional language, in military language.
Military jargon.
Military jargon.
Of course, they had a satellite phone too, which probably didn't help.
Yes, but you know, that was and is part of Care Australia's philosophy, that we won't have people working in an emergency area unless they've got constant communications out of the country, preferably back to head office in Canberra. So that's why they would have had a satellite phone.
Can I ask you this? Did they have any OSCE documents with them?
Oh, good heavens, no. No.
Definitely
no
not.
No.
With Pratt, Wallace and Yellen detained, there was definitely no mention of the care contract, all through the long weeks of their trial and the successive attempts to free them, not just by Malcolm Fraser, but Foreign Minister Alexander Downer, and world figures such as Nelson Mandela, a veritable who's who of who to call in a time of such distress.
Let me ask you directly, do you think that this had anything to do with what happened to Steve Pratt and Peter Wallace?
No, I don't.
You don't?
No, I really don't. Nothing relating to this was raised in court in any of the evidence.
But did people know about it?
They knew about the program.
Yeah, but they didn't
overall
know about Care Canada's contract. That's the point.
But they knew a lot of people had contracts supplying KVM monitors. This was not unusual.
Was any other care organisation involved in
No,
this?
but a lot of other organisations were. I don't know which they were, and I do not know to what detail the actual implementation of the program was reported to the government of Yugoslavia.
As well as making sure the existence of the contract never came to light, Malcolm Fraser also did all he could to engage the Serbian leadership, making statements that if not exactly pro-Serbian could be interpreted that way. He's still doing it.
Well, it was the West's decision to go to war, not Yugoslavia's. And when I say the West's decision, there is a great deal of evidence to suggest that Rambouillet was organised to provide an excuse to go to war. And I say that quite clearly and deliberately.
Such sentiments have been rewarded.
But let me put one other thing that's happened since I've been going to Yugoslavia and on my last or second last visit. We signed a country agreement with the government of Yugoslavia. Now, the agreement that we were able to negotiate, which sets out government obligations, sets out our obligations, was the first for any international NGO. Now, I think that indicates quite clearly that the government of Yugoslavia values the work that CARE is doing.
But does it devalue the position of aid organisations generally? Certainly, Médecins Sans Frontières thinks so.
I think that this whole mission creep that humanitarian aid organisations are going into at the moment is a hugely retrograde step. I think that we need to go back to basics. I think we need to look at the fundamental principles of impartiality and being very careful about independence from governments. I mean, I think that even Malcolm Fraser's position is being quite ambiguous in the Yugoslav conflict.
In what sense?
Well, for a start, he's the head of a non-government organisation, and yet he goes as the Australian government envoy to the region. I mean, that is something that astounds me. And I think that he's come out with very strong statements of his own against the NATO bombing. And I certainly think that meeting with indicted war criminals gives them an element of legitimacy that I would certainly steer away from doing.
So in that situation, he made a mistake himself?
I feel he did. He probably doesn't feel he did, but I feel that he did, yes.
What Malcolm Fraser does feel strongly is that the episode of the Care Canada contract must never be allowed to happen again.
There'll be a meeting in Ottawa in May, where the Care International Board meets, which will decide, should there be a policy for the organisation that will be binding on members? I happen to believe that that meeting will make a decision that CARE should not be involved in monitoring operations in an emergency area when its main task is humanitarian aid. Its main task is keeping people alive. I think it can create a perception which I'd prefer not to be able to create.
Which is what our story is all about.
I suppose it is.
But awaiting Fraser in Ottawa is a sister organisation that's thoroughly unrepentant.
Malcolm Fraser takes a more traditional view of humanitarian work. It really, it is a real policy debate, and both sides have legitimate points. We tend to take a more, I think, progressive view of humanitarian work. We believe that there's a whole range of work that has to do with peace building and reconciliation that humanitarian work agencies should be involved in. If they're not, and they only do their traditional humanitarian work, then it can have very perverse results and can lead to deaths, not only among the population, but among the humanitarian workers themselves.
Aid workers are always collecting information for their own benefit in the field. They have to be very vigilant with regard to their own security, so we need to know what's going on. And certainly there has been suspicions in the past that aid organisations may be collecting military information. But I think that the problem with this coming out and it being official and it being recognised is that unless CARE does something about it to say, well, we made a mistake and we recognise that and we won't do this sort of thing again, then I do think it's a problem.
CARE, as we've seen, tried desperately to limit the danger to Pratt, Wallace and Yellen of the Canadian arrangement. But tonight comes a surprising revelation from the Serbs. Deputy Information Minister Miodrag Popovic maintains Belgrade knew all along, but chose not to make an issue of it.
Well, actually, I was happy to see that Australia itself, or the media in Australia, discovered this story. On the other hand, I knew about this, but you have to understand my stand, because it is a minor problem for this country. Much bigger problem was the intelligence activities, not only from the people from the CARE, but from the OSCE mission itself.
We're looking here at a catastrophe in this country.
Popovic is still convinced the 3 CARE workers were spies, but says they were freed in the national interest.
All along, we are just trying to say that we were and we are still defending our country, and that we are not villains and murderers, and those 3 people were actually pardoned for that cause. I don't see that some of people that were left without their homes and deprived of their livelihoods, or even now living without their loved ones, on those targets that been spotted by those people from CARE, that they are going to forgive them that easy.
But milking CARE's continuing largesse comes first.
Yes, people don't like CARE, people don't like humanitarian organizations, but I think that the picture is somehow false. In wider prospect, we need their help, and they are welcome to assist those people in need.
Yet for all Serbia's nonchalance, there's a sobering element to this affair, not just for CARE, but for all aid agencies. The cost of so-called mission creep in the Balkans is that those carrying the bandages in one hand are sometimes also suspected of carrying a knife in the other. If the suspicious sentiments in Serbia are catching, then the real impact worldwide can only be guessed at. One thing tonight is certain. Within CARE Australia, there are bitter recriminations over whether, as the lead nation in Serbia, it should have turned the tap off on the CARE Canada deal.
If Charles Tapp had the authority to stop this, as you say, and he didn't do it, have you told him that you weren't happy about that?
Well, that's an internal matter for CARE.
Have you asked for his resignation?
Oh, good heavens, no.
So it's not that serious, an omission?
Look, whatever's happened, happened. We've all learned a bit.
Graham Davis with that report. Joining me now in the studio is Care Australia's Chief Executive Officer Charles Tapp. In our Melbourne studio, Beres Gwynn from World Vision, and in Canberra, Fiona Terry from Médecins Sans Frontières. Thank you all for joining us. First to you, Charles Tapp. Did you make a mistake when you involved Care in a monitoring operation?
Well, I'm sort of very interested in the way that you've been trying to portray this one, Jana. In my view, I think that peace is a very good thing, and peace monitoring is something that is to be commended. I think that in the context of this operation there in Kosovo, the work that the OSCE was doing was actually trying to monitor a peace agreement between the Yugoslav government and NATO. And the OSCE was used, which has many countries who are non-NATO members, seen as being something of a neutral force within that context.
Okay, well, let's get on to the pros and cons of that in a moment. Malcolm Fraser, your chairman, says that the operation should have been stopped. You could have stopped it. You didn't want to stop it, presumably.
No, within the context of Care International, as you've seen, some of the Care members have somewhat different philosophies. I think that's the case in many organisations, not just in Care. And in fact, this whole area and one around the whole human rights debate is something that we've been very much engaged in now for a while. And I think that debate is something which is very positive. I think that's a sign of a healthy organisation, as it is in any healthy democracy.
Okay, Mr. Tapp, but this is not debate, this is action. Do you not accept that there were risks in entangling what, on the face of it, was to be a humanitarian aid mission with a military monitoring operation?
But this was a peace monitoring operation. I think the thing that we have to be sort of quite clear about in here, all right, is as Malcolm Fraser said, you know, with the advantage of hindsight, you've been running a program in relationship to this one. You know, we have had a very, very long year in Care Australia dealing with various allegations which have been made and suggestions, most obviously the Steve Pratt coerced confession about questions of espionage and links and everything else. Now, the Care Canada, the contract that they were involved in was not a secret contract. It was perfectly open. It is something that is available if anybody wishes to try and have a look at it. In fact, I think it's even mentioned on their website.
Well,
the program
if I could interrupt you here, there is a lot of information that is publicly available from the OSCE, including the fact that this was predominantly a military operation. It was charged with monitoring troop movements, military hardware. They told us this quite openly.
Yeah,
now, your people involved in a humanitarian aid program were embroiled in this.
No, our people...
Do you not see any liabilities in this?
Look, I think, as Malcolm Fraser said, there are many lessons which one can learn, and I think we've all learned lessons from this, from Rwanda, from Zaire, from the Somalia operations. I mean, that is something that we're facing a changing world, and a world that is becoming more dangerous. I think what is very interesting to note there is that clearly for the Serbs themselves who were aware of this, it wasn't an issue. They were obviously looking for things to try and put into a trial. For Steve, Peter and
it is an
Steve,
issue
Peter
in the sense
and
that
Branko.
they now say that they doubt all humanitarian aid organisations. I mean, they suspect that they're all spies. And in this instance, we have a humanitarian aid agency accepting a contract to provide monitors for a country that the Serbs regard as an enemy state. Now, why shouldn't they regard Care as playing a double game?
But the Serbs actually had signed an agreement. That was a part of an agreed program. Also, for which the fact that these observers were looking at atrocities committed on the other side from the KLA. I really find that this is rather odd. That you are here suggesting to me, are you not, that some form of peace monitoring program is some way innately bad. No, that's something that I'm trying to get an understanding of what it is that you're actually trying to prove here.
All I'm doing is
passing on to you. Are you suggesting that our people are spies or something?
No, what I'm passing on to you is what the OSCE openly tells us, and that is that this was a military operation. Secondly, that while the Serbs agreed to this undertaking, they received no information of any value. The OSCE also told us that the material that they gathered, that your people helped to set up, the gathering thereof, all that material went directly to NATO.
Look, in terms of our people getting involved in trying to set something up, as John Watson has said, and you've shown that one, that was something that was separate from what it was that Steve and Peter and the others were doing in a humanitarian operation.
Can I ask you about the principle of this?
Many other agencies have been involved in peace monitoring activities in in military zones and military areas. I mean, I think the Australian government has been involved in such contracts with other agencies. We might want to look at Bougainville, look at East Timor, look at Indonesia.
Let me talk to you about your specific situation. Your chairman, Malcolm Fraser, thought that the information that we had about this operation was dangerous enough that it could have jeopardised the release of Pratt and Wallace. He asked us not to publish this story.
Yes, of course he did.
Well, why?
Because we didn't know at that time what on earth it was that in any form of trumped-up charges may be used by the Yugoslavs. We just knew that the chaps were going to be going on trial.
No,
we
but
also saw
you can see in his wariness there, can't you, the germ of a truth. Isn't that the case?
Well,
that this kind of involvement can be risky, can be dangerous.
Yeah, no, I think that any work that we get involved in those type of situations is risky. You only need to look at the number of aid workers who've actually been killed in areas of conflict to understand that we are involved in very much risky situations.
No, but this is a risk that you clearly chose freely to embroil your people in. It's a risk to your operations, isn't it? And a risk to the lives of your people on the ground.
No, I don't see that this was a risk to the lives of our people on the ground.
Well, there are, as we've heard, the critical comments of people like Fiona Terry from MSF, who believe that it jeopardises not only your own people, but aid agency personnel generally. Do you not agree with that?
No, I think that we, along with many other agencies, have been involved for a long time now in a debate on these sorts of matters. I think one of the great advantages of the international aid community is you have a large number of different perceptions and different types of activities by different agencies, from on one extreme the types of the Amnesty International, some of the extreme advocacy organisations, through to those who are far more involved in direct delivery of humanitarian assistance, far more like Care Australia. And certainly this is not the type of program that Care Australia would be specifically getting involved in. But as John Watson said, that's part of a debate and discussion which is going on within Care International. And one of the things within Care is that when you're dealing with Care, you are dealing with a number of different entities.
Mr. Tapp, your donors, no doubt, would be very interested to hear that. I mean, they would presume, I think, that the donations that they give go to purely humanitarian efforts.
They do. Care Australia's donors, what are they providing goes to humanitarian efforts.
Well, here they see you involved in a military monitoring operation. The Serbians, whom you were there presumably to help or to help a crisis situation, believe that the OSCE monitors were spies. You've just heard them say that. Now, isn't that in and of itself a dangerous position to put your people in?
But Jana, I've also heard the Serbians say repeatedly that Steve, Peter and Branko were spies. We've seen the whole court case. We've seen all the discussion, all those points that you raised about what they were carrying in their car, the border that they crossed. This has been discussed in great detail last year. We've had, journalists, everybody given open access, to us, and they've been through this. And to start raising this one again, frankly, seems to me actually a little bit irresponsible. Because, the Serbs have said that they were spies. We know they're not spies. I think Foreign Minister Alexander Downer used the word preposterous. All I can add to that is the word ditto.
Certainly the credibility of the Serbian government may be in doubt, but it's the perception, is it not, as pointed out by other aid workers in that story, that counts. Nevertheless, we do have to end this very quickly. Let me just ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
Mr. Fraser did make some very critical remarks of you. It's very unusual for a chairman to speak out in this way, publicly, critically of his own organisation. How comfortable do you feel in your role?
Malcolm is never backward in coming forward, and neither am I. Malcolm and I have an excellent relationship, and I think it's one that anybody in the aid industry would tell you has been very effective. Of course, you wouldn't care to run some of the other bits where he's spoken very positively about what I have done. In fact, he's speaking glowingly about the work that I have done within Care Australia. And I think that certainly trying to make an issue out of that one is really stretching things a little bit.
Also, very quickly, was Steve Pratt, as Mr. Fraser says, opposed to his involvement in this program?
Steve Pratt wasn't opposed to the program. He was concerned about it being directly associated with the humanitarian activities of Care Australia. Steve's role within the context of Care International, a federation that we have, is actually to promote and to facilitate country directors in all our countries.
Okay, but he was concerned about Care Australia's involvement in this program.
No, he wasn't concerned about the involvement. He was concerned about the way that the Care Canada operation which was actually merely acting as a recruitment function, as many other agencies do, for their governments, to provide people to the OSCE. OSCE chose the people, they reported to OSCE, they were not care people who were getting involved in these activities. I'm having a hard time trying to understand what it is that is the real issue here.
Care people paid by the Canadian government. All right, look, let's try and broaden this out. Fiona Terry, has MSF ever been involved in an operation with military implications like this one?
No, we try to avoid them, well, we do avoid them completely.
Why?
Because our fundamental purpose is to alleviate suffering, and the most appropriate way to try and alleviate suffering is to be transparent, to go in impartially, and to tell belligerents that you are there, you are no threat to them whatsoever. And that is the way that we try and get access to people all around the world. Basically, the practical measure of neutrality is a perception by belligerents. So it is so important to always be transparent and to not get involved in things that could be questionable of this nature. So even when it's a UN force in Yugoslavia or in Liberia, for example, or wherever, we try to disassociate ourselves and retain our independence.
Would you have taken any money in Kosovo from any government?
No, we didn't. We specifically took no government money of any NATO country in Kosovo.
Beres Gwyn, has World Vision ever been tempted?
The issue for World Vision is very much one of retaining the focus on our humanitarian agenda. There are very many situations where the needs are extraordinarily great and our motivation is certainly strong to be able to assist. But we do try to find ways to ensure that our humanitarian mandate is paramount. And that sometimes does involve having to decline funding from various sources to ensure that we're able to maintain that position.
Well, where have you drawn the line? What money have you turned down?
In particular situations, it has been our position so far that World Vision's reputation and the understanding both by national governments in the countries where we work and by our donors has been such that we haven't been in that particular situation. But certainly it is important for us to be able to ensure that there is transparency, as Fiona has mentioned, but to acknowledge that these are very complex situations and the area of influence for non-government organisations like World Vision is actually fairly limited.
Right, well, non-government organisations in the past used to be just that, but as we're discussing today, a great many aid dollars do come from governments who contract organisations like yours to do jobs they might have done themselves in the past. Is there, Fiona Terry, a trade-off attached to taking government money?
Well, I don't think per se taking government money is a problem, because I think governments have responsibilities to citizens in other parts of the world. But within MSF, we always try and retain less than 50% of our money coming from governments, and we'll never take politically tainted money, even if that money is not tainted per se, but is perceived to be tainted. For instance, Australian government money in Bougainville or East Timor, for example. So we do try and stay away from those sorts of issues. And I think it's very important that we do. We're non-government organisations, and that means that we try to put humanitarian concerns first. Governments have different priorities. They have to trade off security concerns, economic concerns, etc. So they won't necessarily put humanitarian concerns first.
Charles Tapp, is there money that CARE would not take?
Well, I think it's interesting what Fiona talks about, the 50% figure. I mean, for CARE Australia, the funding we receive from the Australian government is about 15%. I think the issue of perceptions of funding coming from different governments or being overly funded by one source can be a real concern. And that's something, of course, that any organisation should be taking very seriously and looking at very closely.
Is your independence, that is the independence of all aid organisations, being whittled away by this perception that you are, in some cases, beholden to governments?
I'm not sure. I think that within the context of many of the aid agencies, we make a point of making sure that doesn't happen. There is a great advantage to be receiving funds from a number of different sources, because it does give you a much greater level of flexibility and gives you an ability to take a view. I think, ironically, the ability to take a view, you have Care Canada on one hand, whose population support very heavily what have been for them award-winning civil society programs. Perhaps reflects more the context of society in Canada and their views of humanitarian assistance and the question of human rights. Whereas for us here in Australia, we take what John Watson refers to as perhaps a more traditional view. And for us, a humanitarian mission is paramount. That is the basis upon which we exist.
But to return then to that point, as you say, Dr. Watson there says that your involvement in this particular case was advantageous to CARE. Malcolm Fraser, your chairman here, says it should never have happened. I mean, CARE does sound like an organisation at odds with itself there, doesn't it?
No, I don't think it's a question at odds in itself. There is a very healthy debate that goes on within CARE. We have a meeting coming up actually in Ottawa in May, which this whole point will be discussed further.
Well, Malcolm Fraser was categorical about that. He said that meeting would decide that these sorts of missions would never be undertaken again.
Yeah, and as I said earlier on, Malcolm is never backward in coming forward.
So if I could stop you there, he is the public face of CARE. Now, you're saying to me coyly he's not backward in coming forward. He's categorically saying this won't happen again. And that undertaking probably means a lot to CARE donors. What is CARE's true position?
No, so for CARE Australia, quite clearly, we would not be involved in that type of program. We wouldn't be taking funds from the Australian. We would not be taking. We would not be taking funds from the Australian government. What I'm saying is that peacekeeping is a very fine thing, and those types of peacekeeping programs are something that are to be commended. The fact that CARE Australia would not actually specifically be involved in taking funds, say, from the Australian government, whereas other agencies may have done. Right, that's the position of CARE Australia. We happen to exist in a CARE federation, upon which there are slightly different perspectives from some of our members.
But that is not the point that Malcolm Fraser so forcefully made. He was saying that CARE Australia would never be involved in this kind of program again. The program that you tell me was a fine program.
Well, I think the peacekeeping program, as Malcolm Fraser said, it was a laudable program. It was a fine program, and certainly, as he said, with the perspective of hindsight. They would not wish to be involved in that sort of program again. And sitting here in front of you, having you asking a lot of what seem to be rather strange questions about CARE Australia, I mean, yes, with hindsight, perhaps not.
Well, I mean, you say that they're strange questions, but judging by the number of phone calls your people have made to other aid organisations in the last 48 hours, I assume that you think this is an issue worth airing.
I'm not sure what you're talking about, Jana.
Well, we've had phone calls from numerous aid organisations saying that CARE Australia has been ringing around trying to shore up their position in relation to the story that we're airing this evening. Clearly, it's a vexed question.
No, we have had a number of agencies coming to us, some of whom have been absolutely, also appalled about some of the points that are being raised here on this programme by you, and some of whom who aren't also here on this programme to put forward their perspectives. I mean, I suggest one of the people that you might want to talk to would be Janet Hunt of the Australian Council for Overseas Aid. I mean, they've been involved in peace monitoring activities themselves. I mean, from my perspective, I've had a number of agencies actually calling me.
All right, well, let's move on to the broad issue. The general public, I think it's fair to say, sees humanitarian aid as a charitable and impartial act, uncompromised by other considerations, perhaps business, political considerations. Is it still fair to say, Fiona Terry, that that's what humanitarian aid is all about in the year 2000?
Well, I would like to believe so, and I'm quite surprised that others do not feel that it is, because I would like to believe that we could firstly alleviate suffering with the minimum amount of negative consequences towards how aid can be diverted towards war or how we can legitimise certain belligerent parties. I feel that once we have conquered our primary purpose and are doing that properly and we are actually alleviating suffering, well, then it might be time to start branching out into these other areas. My fear with humanitarian aid organisations getting involved in this is that we further exonerate states from their responsibilities. I mean, we all talk about in the humanitarian community the humanitarian alibi, that states deploy non-government organisations to undertake these tasks because they don't want to get involved. Now, all aid can ever be is treating the symptoms of a crisis. We need political support to address the causes. So the more that aid organisations get involved in these types of issues, and this expanded mission, then the more we exonerate states from their own responsibilities.
Beres Gwyn, to whom do you, as World Vision, to whom do you feel beholden? To whom do you answer?
Primarily to the people we're trying to help. And there are, I think, general agreements among organisations like ours to work together to ensure that standards are set internationally to which we subscribe to make sure that that happens. We also, I think, have to take into account that while within the international humanitarian assistance agenda there is an enormous amount of excellent work taking place, some of it, much of it, funded by governments, and that should not denigrate the effectiveness of that work or the work of humanitarian aid agencies. But what I'd like also to say is that there are many, many NGOs, as we call them, non-government organisations, and I think it's important to make a distinction between those agencies which are operational, particularly having a presence nationally in the countries concerned, and those agencies which might see themselves better placed to engage in perhaps the more politically oriented activity.
The recent Economist article labelled NGOs as the kind of businesses that are in business to stay in business. Is this a label that you might all be tainted with? And if it is, how do you fight against that perception, Fiona Terry?
Yes, I'm afraid that I feel that we may well be labelled that way. It's an expanded industry, and it is indeed an industry in many ways. And I think that we need to go back to basics, and we need to recreate a sense of credibility, perhaps, and stay away from all of this business orientation. There's a lot of talk now of humanitarian organisations trying to get more involved with business and trying to make them more responsible for humanitarian crises around the world. But I really feel that we need to stick with our fundamental purpose, and once we're doing that correctly, then we can talk about these other things.
All right, I'm afraid we will have to leave it there. I thank you all for your time this evening.
Thanks, Yana.